Welcome, everybody, to the Artisan Church All-Inclusive Podcast. My name is Josephus.
I'm Reed Conley. I'm an organizing pastor of Artisan Church, and we are so glad that you've tuned in with us today. And today is a special day. We have our very first guest on the podcast, and so I'd like to introduce to you Reverend David Bonnema, senior pastor of Unity Presbyterian Church in Denver, North Carolina. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, David.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is really neat to be a part of a podcast. Love anytime I can be here at Artisan Church, and so, just thank you.
Well, we appreciate your support from the very beginning. You've been a cheerleader and a mentor and so much more than that to Artisan all along the way. So just want to say thank you.
Yeah,
first
absolutely.
Of all. And maybe for our listeners on the podcast, many of us know who you are, but maybe you could just share a little bit about yourself in a nutshell.
Sure, absolutely. So I am the senior pastor of Unity Presbyterian Church. This is in Denver in the Lake Norman area. Been there since 2018. Just absolutely love the church. I've got 3 daughters, 1 dog, and love Ultimate Frisbee. Play that every single week as kind of my hobby. So, a little bit about me.
Yeah.
Ultimate Frisbee, is that like, that's not the golf one, right?
That is not, although that is fun too. Yes.
What's
this
Ultimate?
Is the one that's played on a football field, and you're trying to, knock the disc away from everybody else and score touchdowns and such.
Oh, that's sweet. Is there flags involved? Or
No flags.
Like no flag football type?
No,
okay.
And no tackling either.
So
Gotcha.
play never stops.
But play never stops.
You just keep throwing the disc but you can't run with it.
Yep.
So you throw the disc to the next person, and then you play until somebody scores.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Okay, that's sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that game too. And someday, when I'm in better shape, I'll get out there and
There
run.
we go.
I actually just started playing indoor soccer.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
And I can tell you, it doesn't take someday to be able to get out there. You just need to get out there.
Just get out there until you fall down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Today's that day, Reed.
My
Okay.
knees definitely feel it, but it's fun. You don't feel it the day of. It's like it revitalizes that youthful spirit, and you just like get out there and get to running, and then the next day,
It's always the next day.
Must be so nice to be.
that Aleve bottle looks so different.
I was just going to say, it must be so nice to be so young and, agile and limber.
We all know I'm middle-aged, but we won't get down that rabbit hole today.
I actually have a birthday tomorrow, so I'm thinking about these things.
Oh, happy birthday.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Reed.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, as we get started, we have a topic today that is a heavy one, and we're going to talk about atonement. But I thought, just to jumpstart it, I thought of a question for you, Pastor David, but you can answer as well, Josephus. So let's create a scenario. Imagine someone is in the church lobby, and they come up to you and say, "Hey, what does atonement mean?" And then you have 5 minutes to explain it before worship starts. So what do you say in that situation? And then the follow-up question is, what do you think they really want to know?
Okay, so this, you pose it like a theoretical question. It's really not. This happens probably every other Sunday.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, someone will come up to you.
I don't think it's fair that he gets to go first because he does this for a living. So
Right.
maybe the person who's going to get the answer wrong should go first.
Okay.
Because I don't want people to be like, "Oh, you got the answer from both pastors sitting next to you."
Someday this is going to happen to you, though. I'm serious. Somebody's going to come up. You're supposed to be sitting at the computer getting ready for service to start, and somebody's going to say, "Hey, Josephus, can you just explain atonement to me?"
See, I think I want to answer first, not because I want to take the thunder away from the guests, but I feel like the experience here from both of you would influence my answer, and I feel like my answer might need some work. So I'm gonna just go ahead and shoot my shot.
Yeah,
Josephus,
go for it.
Because I think
what is atonement?
So for me, I think of atonement as paying for something, like repaying like a debt to that, repaying a debt to something, And while I don't think we will ever in our lifetime be able to repay the debt that was, picked up for us on that tab, I think it's just, trying to do our best to like get as close to that amount as possible forever in the red.
Okay.
I think you did a good job.
Yes.
I think that was a good answer.
I'm pretty impressed. I mean, there's definitely. I mean, I've done worse.
I honestly thought the way I answered that, I would at least get an eyebrow raised out of you on that one, because he was like, "Wait, a debt?"
I never raise eyebrows.
So how I would respond is the scripture authors do have different sorts of terms that they use to try to explain, and debt is one of those. Like, your debt has been paid, right? Artisan Church is great with contemporary worship. A lot of contemporary songs use that sort of imagery, right? There's a debt. That debt needed to be paid. But I would say that's one image. It's not the only image we see in Scripture, but that's definitely one. So I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah. See, I told you I was gonna get one. No, I'm just playing.
But if I had to answer, and I had 5 minutes, which is, what happens, and your mind is already thinking about worship, you're about to, go up there, and then you have to kind of pause and go, oh, okay, this is an important question. And you want to give it some space, although you recognize you have time constraints. I mean, in a limited amount of time, I would just say, well, atonement, although that word is not in the Bible, what we use it to mean is to say, why did Jesus have to die on the cross? That's really, I think, atonement is pointing us towards the cross, pointing us towards Jesus' sacrifice, and probably that person wondering, well, why? What is it about that death that is foundational for Christianity? Now, I don't think we can get into the nuances in 5 minutes, but I think that's what that person is probably wondering. Okay, I know Jesus' death is important, but what's that really mean?
Yes, and you mentioned that there's more than one way to describe atonement, and there are multiple theories. I got into the weeds because, well, obviously I'm preaching a sermon about the same thing last Sunday, and there are probably a dozen or more different atonement theories out there, and so there's all of these little nuances and details about what is actually happening on the cross, and so I think it's possible that sometimes people are wondering, what's your flavor? What's your brand? Where do you align on this thing? Because it does kind of ripple out into other things that you might believe theologically. But I think, and this is something that I wondered as a young follower, young believer, was, what does that mean? Jesus' death on the cross is really important. It is the focal point of this entire story. It's where it all comes to a head. Does God like violence? Does God like blood and gore? And, does that have to be a part of the story? So I think that might be a motivator for some as to, like, what do I really want to know when I'm asking that question?
Yeah.
Especially coming from the outside. This is kind of scary stuff.
Well, it is. And I think you're right. If you grow up with it, you just go, oh, yeah, that's no big deal. Cross, no big deal. If you're coming without that background, it does seem a lot more jarring, and it seems violent, and it seems like, well, why would God choose that? Why would God want that? And so I think we need kind of a better answer to this modern day culture to really be able to explain the cross. And I preached on it as well on Sunday. Not an easy topic, particularly in 25 minutes. You can't go through all 12 different theories. But one idea that I had is trying to understand or convey, this isn't something that, like, God the Father was saying, this has to happen because I'm so wrathful and my wrath needs to go somewhere. You hear that sometimes with atonement theories, like, well, God's mad and someone has to pay that price, right? I really see it as, no, Jesus came to earth. Jesus taught all these beautiful things in the Gospels, and the world rejected that. The world said, no, we don't want to live that way. The world put him on a cross. And I think then God used that moment to say, okay, I'm going to bring redemption into this world. It's not that I'm choosing this. It's not that this is the way I want it to happen, but I'm going to use this moment of almost deepest despair and make something good come out of it. And so, yeah, there's a different angle that you got to explore there.
Off of something you just said, I think like a question that I would have had like in my younger years, or just like thinking about it from more of an intellectual side as opposed to a spiritual side. When you say, God's angry, do you think that there's like, do you think God might have sent Jesus so he could like get rid of his anger, like so that he could just stop being upset? Because now the path is like pretty much the debt is already paid for us. All we have to do is basically, acknowledge it, and like it kind of alleviates God needing to be angry anymore, needing to, like put his wrath into the world, so to speak.
See, you're bringing up such a good point of the motivation. What's the motivation of the cross? And I never see the motivation of the cross as anger or wrath being satisfied. I see the motivation as love, of Jesus saying, I'm going to show what self-sacrificial love looks like in this world. And we get this idea sometimes that God just can't be around sin, right? God is so angry with sin. But then I look at Jesus, who is God, and what was Jesus doing all the time? Hanging out with sinners, saying, come over for dinner. I'm not mad at you. I'm not going to exclude you, but instead I'm going to start a relationship with you.
My question, I guess, so I thought God and Jesus, even though Jesus is God in the flesh, aren't they two? They're slightly different, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we getting into the Trinity now? I thought this was atonement.
Well, no. Well, I guess that's what I'm saying is, it's like I don't want the idea for it to be about wrath or about anger, but more so like getting rid of that. And like you said, Jesus really is the embodiment of like, hey, I didn't come. It's not because I want to be angry. It's not because, but it's sort of like, the God who never, that isn't Jesus, is expelling his anger through like, all right, I see. Let me go ahead and try it a different way.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you're exactly right. The Trinity it exists in the sense that it's three distinct persons of God, but still we worship kind of one God. And that's probably a whole nother episode that you guys can talk about. But I think the kind of wrath being satisfied, the anger of God, is out of those like 12 atonement theories, probably one of those. But it's never one that I've emphasized because I don't find that to be the most true expression of probably what was happening there. And so I really think the motivator is kind of love. But Reed, I'm curious, what would you take on that as you're trying to share your thoughts with the church as well?
Oh, yes. So we both had the same sort of question to wrestle with on Sunday in our sermons, and the questions were, did Jesus need to die? And then did Jesus need to die on the cross? Was that an important part of the equation? And then the last question was, could Jesus' life and his teaching been enough to show us what we need to know about God's love and lead us to new life? And so when I dug into those questions, of course, you find the atonement theories, and there are so many. And some are about substituting Jesus for us, and there's about paying a ransom, paying a debt, and they're all really helpful in certain ways as a way to understand both how the early church maybe understood what was happening in that moment on the cross when Jesus died. But I think what was most interesting to me was to think about why. And to explore why was God choosing to redeem humanity. And it goes back to that same idea of love. God loves us more than God is a just God to say, I'm going to forgive you with myself, with my whole self. And so Jesus freely walks into this situation where he's going to be tortured and hurt and beaten, and the most fascinating part to me when I looked at it this time was the forgiveness that comes from the person of Jesus in Jesus' humanity, he's experiencing this horrible thing, and then in the midst of it looks and says, forgive them.
How about that?
That's powerful.
Well, and in that way, Jesus shows us a model of how we are supposed to respond to kind of the evil in this world as well. I mean, Jesus, being God, in a moment could have just snapped his fingers and gotten off the cross and then sought revenge on the people who were seeking to put him there. But he didn't choose to do that. He chose to forgive instead. And I think in that way, the cross becomes our model. Where as Christians who are following in the way of the cross, we say, okay, we're going to choose forgiveness too. We're not going to choose trying to get even with people who do us wrong. It's a totally different way to look at the world.
Another piece of the understanding of it is that, first of all, Jesus really died. That's a part of the story, but also he died at the hands of people. It was the people that made the choice to kill Christ because he had really stirred the pot quite a bit. I mean, there was a lot of motives behind it, but it was people that chose to and acted and actually killed Jesus. And I think that's a helpful detail to say, to your point, God didn't make this happen. It flowed out of this evil.
Yeah. Can we just acknowledge the choice that they made, though? Like, between the two people was absolutely ridiculous.
It seemed like a no-brainer to go the other way, right?
Just like a complete no-brainer. Like, I don't... Could you imagine being that guy? Like, he must have felt like he just hit the jackpot. Because, like, there's nowhere, like, you would ever think...
So we're talking about Barabbas.
Right.
The criminal who could have been killed in place of Jesus, but was not. So I guess that says there's a lot going on. There's a lot of undercurrent going on. Swaying the people the other way.
So do you think he needed to die? Jesus, that is. Sorry.
That question's for me?
Yeah.
So I answered this question on Sunday, and I wrestled with it and talked to people about it too. I think if we believe in the sovereignty of God, we believe that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, infinite, that we have to say there is a possibility in some universe that God could have had another plan that could have redeemed humanity. But God didn't. God did not go that way. And the story didn't go that way. So we have sacrifice. We have a sacrifice that lines up with the Old Testament model of atonement in a certain way that was probably very helpful to an early church in the way that they understood what was going on. The early Christians are Jewish, and so they understood this in the context of a sacrifice.
And I think an important point here, too, is in understanding the cross, we can't emphasize it so much that we divorce it from the resurrection. And I see modern-day Christians sometimes doing that, where it's all about the cross and all about what Jesus did for us. And then it's like, oh, also the resurrection. And it's like, no. The early Christians, I mean, think of the gospel writers. The gospel writers usually commit one verse to Jesus dying on the cross, and that's it. And the focus is on the resurrection. Because in the resurrection, what happens is God conquering death. And so I think two things are dealt with on the cross. It's sin, for sure, but also death. And we can't emphasize one at the exclusion of really the other.
And it's also more miraculous or even like more impressive than death. Everybody knows death is gonna come. Like it's there's no getting out of it. So someone dying, even by sacrifice or by murder, is not as impressive as somebody being resurrected. I mean, even Lazarus being resurrected was like it was just wow. So I think you hit the nail on the head with yes. I think Jesus needed to die solely because it was God's plan, and who am I to like really say that that was the wrong plan.
And without death, we have no resurrection.
Right.
Then we don't have anything to talk about today.
Right.
I find it interesting too, so the gospel writers just touch on it, and then it's Paul that really does a lot of the theological work on what happened on the cross. And one of his big points is that then we need to live as if we are dying to ourselves and then rising with Christ as well. And so there's this whole death and rebirth process that he says daily, pick up your cross daily and make that a part of your life. So I think that's part of the Christian journey, is we say, this is our model, this is what we've seen Christ do, and so in this spiritual way, we are following that and doing that each day as well.
In my sermon Sunday, I also looked at a writing of Paul in Ephesians, and I thought it might be helpful just to talk about today as well. Just a brief passage from Ephesians 2, which we talked about just a couple episodes ago. We were in Ephesians 2 with our kind of our founding verse, Ephesians 2:10. This is verse 13 through 15. It says this: "But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he is our peace. In his flesh he has made both into one and has broken down the dividing wall. That is the hostility between us, abolishing the law with its commandments and ordinances, that he might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace." And I chose this as the focal verse for our sermon because I think that the transformation you were just talking about that comes from the resurrection and our model to follow is so poignant in this moment of forgiveness that we talked about, of Christ forgiving us, and then it flows out into our relationships as well. Here, Paul is talking to a group of young, an early Christian church that is divided, and talking about how we are both unified with God and with one another. And that is just a miracle upon a miracle, that we can be transformed in the moment of being forgiven to know a new way to forgive others as well. And that gave me a lot of energy this week.
Yeah, because that verse you just read really is that description of following in the way of the cross that we're talking about. So I didn't use this verse on Sunday, but I used another of Paul's from 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And the term he uses there, it's similar to what's talked about here, but he uses the term reconciliation. And I think that's the same thing, where he talks about us needing to be reconciled with God, but then also being ambassadors of reconciliation in the world. And that's what we need to do. I mean, here in Ephesians, he says we're bringing peace into the world by choosing forgiveness over hate. And I think we could also say, and we're seeking to reconcile people who are all sinners with one another and with the God who loves them.
Yeah. Which, in a sense, is atonement.
I mean, in a nutshell, I really think that is.
Kind of come full circle now.
We try to make it too complicated sometimes, when really it shouldn't be. It is simply that. You go back to the scriptures, and there it is.
Do you think the idea of atonement being equivalated to almost like an apology is what makes it hard for people? Like, have you ever been wrong and then been like struggling with the idea of like, now I have to apologize to this person, or I have to atone to this person, which makes, I mean, it's such an easy act to do when you think about it, like just to say, hey, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. But at the end of the day, it also forces you to do so many other things, like swallow pride and, put your own self, interest aside and, acknowledge, make the acknowledgement that, hey, I got something wrong.
You just made me think about a parenting moment that happens often, where one of our kids wrongs another one, and we say, "Okay, how do you make this right?" "I gotta apologize," and then the apology is like, "Sorry, you got in my way." right? So to your point, all of the work, it's the motive, right? It's the motivation. Like, am I going to let go of my own stuff? Am I going to sacrifice my own ego and come to the table with that kind of sacrifice? Then we can seek the reconciliation. Then we can make it whole again.
And Josephus, I think you're right. That's one reason people do struggle with the cross, is because they kind of think, well, have I done anything really so bad that God would have to die for me? I'm not like perfect, but I'm not that bad, right?
Right.
And that, I think there's some nuance then in talking about like, well, why did Jesus die for us? It's not just your actions, because sure, none of us are perfect, but none of us are horrible either. But it's this whole inner life that we have that, has a bent away from God and just towards ourselves, that God is almost trying to like restructure and reorient. And so I think it goes beyond just the things we do into the essence of who we are, that in some ways God is simply trying to reclaim in that moment.
Did I don't want to misquote, but didn't I know Jesus had doubts about whether or not he should die. Did he apologize for that?
So I don't think he had doubts, but I don't think he wanted to die. And the reason I say that is I think of the Garden of Gethsemane, and, he is weeping at this point, and it says his tears are like blood, and he is in anguish. But what he's saying to God is, if there's another way, please choose it. If you have some other way that doesn't involve me going to the cross, I want you to choose that. But then in a moment of faithfulness, he says, but not my will, but yours be done. And so I think he still chooses that faithful way of following God, but he knows the pain and he knows what's going to come and really wishes there would be another way.
Because the idea of because that's why I wanted to clarify, because I didn't want it to be wrong, but just the idea, though, if he did and he apologized for not wanting to die, that would be such a, how dare we not, because you mean he's apologizing for doubting that he should have to die, it'd be very powerful, in that sense, because it'd be like, no one else would ever do that. That is the most anti-human thing to do, is imagine apologizing to a doctor, like, hey, I'm sorry, I don't have to die, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we know that, we believe that Jesus experienced all of the emotions that a human can possibly experience. So he was definitely experiencing fear. He was experiencing pain and all of the things that come with being tortured and humiliated, and I think in all of that, it's remarkable that he still had the understanding to say, again, please, Father, forgive them for doing this. And that seems like a superhuman level of forgiveness, an out of body, out of this world kind of way to respond to this most horrible thing. But still, he chose it. He walked right into it.
So we got about 2.5 minutes left.
Yeah.
And I figured we'd do something fun. What we've been doing hasn't been fun, but I figured, let's curveball it, since we do have a guest. Let's do a 2-minute rapid fire questions. Just anything you can think of that's on, I guess, topic.
Okay. Go ahead, kick us off.
So
Are these questions for me?
These questions are for you.
All right, and you want short answers.
Short answer, just rapid fire.
All right.
All right, so How long did it take you to? And I mean, it doesn't have to be about atonement, but I actually just want to get when you actually do video sermons, right?
Yes, I do.
So, what was the challenge on your first one? Like what were your nerves rattled on that, or
Doing my first video sermon.
Yeah.
So I think the challenge is I actually get a lot of energy from the physical presence of a congregation, preaching to them and with them. And so then to preach just to a camera with no one else there, I had to bring all that energy myself. And that was a little bit more challenging than I thought it would be.
Nice? So I know you have more questions. You always have.
What are your questions, Reed?
Oh, what are my questions? I'd like to know, how is your Ultimate Frisbee team doing this year?
Not as well as it should be. So we are 2 wins, 3 losses. We still made the playoffs, which start this week, but I don't know. It's 50-50 if we're going to win this first match.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, though.
I'm trying to keep it important.
So what are some of the topics of the Bible you actually dread having to talk about?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, as a pastor, I love the Bible.
Right.
Okay, I've got to put that out there first.
Oh, no, 100%. Like,
But oh my goodness, some of the Old Testament violence is so hard to deal with.
Right.
Hard to deal with. And I think there's a way to deal with it. It's very nuanced. It takes more than 5 minutes before a sermon to get through. But it is a challenge even reading some of those stories with the amount of violence in there.
yeah, I feel that way about Job. My man Job didn't have to go out like that.
Oh, I love Job, though. I love Job.
All right, well, I'm gonna let you land us.
Oh, okay. Well,
On the
thanks,
script.
everybody.
Thank you for putting up with our questions.
Hey,
Yeah.
loved it. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thanks for joining us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you with us.
Absolutely.
We'll have to do this again sometime.
Hey,
So,
anytime.
all right. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening. And I hope that you'll keep coming back. And again, if you're ever looking for a church here in Lincolnton, North Carolina, or anywhere abroad, you can tune in at 9:30 a.m. on Sundays. And we'd love to welcome you.
I'm your online host, and we are in the Anderson building on Main Street. I forget what is it?
235.
235
East Main Street.
East Main Street in Lincolnton, North Carolina.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.